What's up, everyone? Blake Sloan here with Mr. Alex Prout. Brand new edition of Agent Success Podcast. Got an awesome, very deep sales psychology type show we're talking about today. We're going to dig into, if you remember a few weeks back, we talked about strategic seduction. We're going to dig into some of the key parts of that. One of those, which is what we call convert mindset, right? And if you want, tell a bit about what we talk about convert mindset.
So basically, not everyone is ready to purchase, but our job is to convert their mindset from knowing what they want and getting them exactly to what it means to actually go get what they want.
Yep, and we got two really big views. We got to help them shape what they call their worldview, right?
Absolutely.
And so their worldview is how they see the world, because how Alex sees the world and how I see the world are not always the same.
Right.
Most of them are always going to be different, right? It's like, where I can put a Google search in for, a specific term. You can put a Google search in for the same exact term. You get different websites, right? It's the same thing, kind of how the reality of how the human brain works and the psychology is. We have to convert their worldview to the worldview they really need to help get the result they want, right? The second part of the equation, if you want to go back, you can always go watch that edition on our YouTube channel, also on sloantraining.com. But there's also the self-view. And you have to help convert the self-view of how do they see themselves. Does that consumer see the ability for them to be able to do it? So, hey, well, so-and-so bought a house or so-and-so sold a house, but does that mean I can really actually do it? So just because they believe it's possible does not necessarily mean that they can actually do it. So we're going to dig deeper into that in today's topic. Also, really quick, side note before we jump into that, last week we had 23 interviews. 23 interviews, people that were obviously either in the business or getting the business that want to be part of the team here. And you notice something, though, that was very common between all of them. There was just an overall lack of guidance, or what would you say you kind of thought from that?
As everyone feels lost. Everyone is uncertain on what to expect with this business. It doesn't matter if you're just getting into it, or unfortunately, even if you've been in for a couple years with the wrong broker, you just don't have the certainty you need to even feel good about what you're doing, and it really does kill the love for the business, I find, among the folks that I'm talking to.
And we notice, that there's a disconnect of, like you said, certainty. There's a huge part of uncertainty in what do I need to do, what do I do next, how do I get this, and kind of there's so many moving parts we don't realize, and we talk about this in our trainings all the time. This is a game of chess, right? Moving multiple pieces at the same time in the right order.
Right.
Not just playing checkers, where a lot of people think they'll play move here and move here. In today's marketplace, if you don't play chess, you're going to get destroyed, right? And not be in the business very long. So we'll dig into really kind of deep sales psychology. That's a side note, but if you're out there, follow our stuff online. Go to sloantraining.com. You can get more information on these types of trainings. But if you're not really sure what to do and what the next kind of step for you is, kind of a shameless plug here, is to go there, check out sloantraining.com. If you want a free, no obligation, one-on-one consultation, more than happy to do that, like a free coaching session in essence. More than happy to do that for you as well. But deeper stuff, and this is just part of what we talked about this week in our training. One of the trainings this week was kind of some mistakes that people make, right? The number one problem people make in our business that I've seen in conversion process is, number one, you think that people should buy with you or sell with you just because, right? And talk about that, what we talked about, to our team and everything as well.
It's very simple. It comes from a little bit of laziness, but also a little bit of fear, I suppose. But basically, it's as soon as somebody has a lead that is assigned to them or is in their bucket or that they've converted, they feel like game over. That person has to buy with me. They belong to me.
We make the mistake of thinking just because I talked to them on the phone, just because I'm their lead, just because I even signed them to a buyer agreement or a listing agreement, that they should automatically do business with me. And the reality is they don't. And there's so many times that people that I've even signed agreements with before, and they just disappeared, right? They end up buying from somebody else or buy somewhere else. And so the reality is we got to be aware of that and make sure that we're all the time attacking to help move them through the process, serve them, and help guide them through that process, right? We talked about you've got to be willing to make sure that you make the absolute worst assumptions of what could happen, because the reality is, we use the example of they're speed dating all the time. In today's time, they're on 20 different agent sites. They're searching everywhere. They're talking to multiple people, and you're not the only one. You make the mistake of thinking they are, and here's the thing: they shouldn't really have to, right? They're not sure about who you are. You're even if they've done all the research, met with you, even your friends in this business are talking to somebody behind your back in many cases, right? And so the reality is you have to serve them like that's the case. And so that means you got to double down yourself, and you got to be over really shocking all we talked about and serving them everything they need. I guess you say, reaching out efficiently to them before they call you. If they're calling you about stuff, you're not reaching out enough, right? And so there's all these mistakes that people make. And so the first step of that's super simple here, but don't make that mistake of making the assumption that people should buy with you just because. You've got to be constantly in the mode of earning their business. They're judging the crap out of you the very first time you talk to them, your tonality, your words, what you drive, what you're wearing when you show up to them, right? The reality is you have to be on point at all times to help continue moving through that process. And so that's something that's super important as well. We actually drew out on our board, the boxes we're taking people through that process in the sales process, whether buyer or seller, of them trusting you and feeling like you're the true best option for them in that process, right? And so that's something super important too. Number two, right? You don't realize the client that you're speaking with is not in the frame to buy they're currently in or sell, right? We're just using in sales psychology in general. When I say buy, like you buying you as a seller, right? But the reality is you don't realize the client you're talking to is not in the frame to buy, meaning that we're selling to the people without them being in a true frame to buy. And talk about that, what we kind of talked about a little bit in our training and stuff.
Well, it's basically there's certain things that have to happen in a certain order for someone to be in the frame to purchase and for them to be ready to roll. And if you skip any of those steps, it's going to leave an open gap, and that's where the buyer's remorse starts to creep in.
100%. In today's time, what you're finding is, overall, is that there's so much information. All day long, every day, the consumer, you, me, everyone is inundated with information on our cell phones, scrolling, all this stuff. And so what that happens is that creates two things in your mind. One is chaos. There's this constant chaos, information. How many realtors they got on their friend list on Facebook posting 75 homes a day, right? All these things you see all the time. They're not really sure kind of what to do. There's chaos of information, homes out there, the data on the websites, all this chaos of information they're running into creates a second part, which is paralysis, right? They get paralyzed in that part. And so what that means is you have Bob here, pretend I have a stick figure of Bob. This is Bob at point A, right? Bob at point A is not going to buy or sell. Bob at point B will buy or will sell. Our job there is how do we get Bob from point A to point B? And there's a process of checking these boxes. Obviously, I should have a screen we could draw on, but the reality is Bob at point A is not going to buy. But the problem is we treat Bob at point A like he is going to buy. And so the reality is that, especially in real estate, it's a high-end product. There's a longer sales cycle. The higher the price of the product, the longer the sales cycle, right? And so the reality is we must treat Bob that way, meaning you have to meet Bob or Mary, whoever, where they're at. And so most people don't have the sales IQ to meet them where they're at and go to them and say, hey, look, here's where they're at, here's what's going on, here's what the conversation in their head is saying now. And you want to relate to that, connect to that, to them, and be able to go back to that and now pick them, grab their hand, and walk and guide them to where they want to be, right? And so what's your take on that overall?
It's a responsibility thing. It's not about manipulation or anything like that. It's about the fact that they come to you in the beginning with a very clear target in their mind. In order for you to do your job and what you're responsible for when you agree to help is actually help them convert into that person who is ready to do that business.
Yeah, and that's what people in today's time, they can get information they want. They can Google, you can Google it, get anything, right? But the reality is we want guidance. They want guidance and they want to be led, right? I was talking about an example just on the phone before we started, an insurance agent, right? Where I had an issue with insurance on a new car. And the reality was, like, I don't want to have to Google all this stuff and figure it out and find it. Like, just tell me what I need to do. Is this enough coverage? Do I need to change this? Like, and she's like, well, I don't know. What do you want to do? I'm like, well, that's why I'm asking you because you're my insurance agent. Like, you tell me what needs to be done. I need this specific site to make sure I'm covered. And so, like, the reality is you got to be willing to meet them where they're at and understand it. My concern was not just the lowest price. I needed the right coverage, enough coverage. Did it cover this? What's the difference in this other policy? What was I paying before? And so the reality is I just wanted to be led. And so the consumer there wants to be led by somebody who knows what the hell they're doing, who can meet them there, but you got to be able to help conquer the chaos in their mind because they're overloaded with information. And so the reality is, right, what's got to change between Bob point A and point B? We got to remember that this is a sales cycle. It's a longer process. We always say that purchasing is a process, not a one-time event. And so that's the important part. Number 3, you end up wanting to force the sale. Talk about that. We talked about that a little bit if you want to, or I can if you.
It's desperation. It's pure desperation. You got maybe 1 or 2 clients. You got nothing going on, and you are just so desperate to get that sale done that you end up doing the wrong thing by the person in front of you.
100%, right? So the reality is most salespeople in this business, especially real estate, where the average home sale per year is what, 3.48?
Something like
3.48. We do a 16,000 sides divided by 4,800 agents, right? Whatever that equals right there. Last year, they're driven by scarcity. So they're agents driven by scarcity who are trying to force the sale. The problem is when you're dealing with a high-end product, obviously somebody's life, somebody's home they're going to live in, you can't force the sale. But when you're hungry, you have to force the sale. And I gave the example to our team where last week I took our top sales people to the Virgin Islands, and so there's these jewelry stores everywhere. And the one person we were with wanted to find some pirate treasure jewelry, and there's a couple stores that had them. The first person, guess what? Super hardcore sales dude who was just all sell, and like he was forcing the sale. I felt uncomfortable. They felt uncomfortable. Then guess what? He was reducing the price. You could tell he was very, very highly motivated by the commission he was going to get in the back end, right? We move a couple stores down to a different place. These are side-by-side stores. The reality was, we went to somebody who cost more, who was more of a guide, or who knew the stories, who knew the details, who didn't really give a crap if we bought or not. And it was very awesome to see that process, because the reality is when somebody is in that position of authority, they have the knowledge, they have the stories, they have the detail, they can guide you, and that's exactly what this person did, and it ended up paying more for the same one they trusted it was better. Again, I said the example, all the jewelry in those stores was almost the same. Right. I mean, it's all pretty legit. I mean, it's all legit to be there, to be in that section. And the reality was the difference I looked at in the people was the salesperson. Mm-hmm. Did I trust them? Did I not trust them? Are they forcing the sale? And so you got to be an authority figure, right, with knowledge that can help guide them. Doesn't mean you're not going to be motivated to help a sale, right? But the reality is you can't be desperate. Today's time, people catch themselves forcing the sale, especially if you've been in a place of scarcity, meaning you need a deal. You haven't had many deals. So we talk about this all the time. The best sales happen when our agents are closing for a month, every month, which is kind of the target. You don't really care if they buy or not, but you do care because you want them to get it, but they don't. And so now you can be fully real with your client. Right. Here's the deal. You know what? Probably don't want to buy that then. And then you're able to have those real conversations. We have this thing we live by here. We tell our clients what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And sometimes that is difficult, but the reality is that's our motto, because that's what they need the most, right? And so that's important as well. Number 4, this is by far probably the most important one I see that people make this mistake here, is they make the mistake of thinking that the data you have, mistake of thinking that just giving them more data will solve the problem, and ultimately it won't. What did you hear on that? What's your your thought?
It's basically, people think that just because they can send a bunch of web pages, a bunch of numbers and everything like that, that it's automatically going to force the person into a decision.
And the problem is that doesn't ever work. Now, is that part of it? Yes, but the reality is, as you all know, basic sales stuff, that it's always an emotional sale backed up by logic, meaning 80, more so probably 90% emotion, 10% by logic, right? So the reality is people don't buy homes for logic. They say they do, but that's not the real reason. So I gave the example here. Louis Vuitton purses. Mm-hmm. Not a logical purchase at all, right? Crazy. $4,000 shoes, $4,000 purses, not a logical purchase. Some for the $40,000 purses, some people have. But the reality is the same thing, especially when watching this. $1,500 Louis Vuitton shoes, not logical. But guess what? They sell all day, every day. Why? Because of emotion of what it brings. The number one reason, this is a side note, that anyone buys anything from most cases is elevation of status. Absolutely. They got to raise the status. So meaning that you help find the emotion of where they need to go, because here's the thing, we all need that. We need to be driven of what that does, and we got to find the emotion and connect to that client's emotion to help them make the right decision. And sometimes that means, like, I want to know their pains. What's driving them want to buy or sell, right? How do I help serve them? Because once I know that, I can feel that emotion to help them be able to train. I talk about this in the training all the time, right? Anything else you can get from that we talked about?
I would just say that on the point of thinking that the data is going to solve everything, it's just like you said, it's part of the process. But all the data does is validate the emotion from the beginning. If they're feeling something and you can feel it with them and you're really connected in that way, use the data that supports that decision and helps them feel good about it.
100%. Like, especially right now at Myrtle Beach, we gave the example too. Like, we have to help them feel. Mm-hmm. So if your clients are up north where most of the people relocating are, right, and it's cold, and you help them feel Myrtle Beach, like the energy here. It's spring, it's getting warm. I think it's 75 degrees today, right? The reality is, like, get them feeling that. They're up north where it's cold. Send them photos. Mm-hmm. We have to get our clients to the point where they're feeling versus just having that aspect of kind of where they're at. And so the reality is we got to make sure we take them through that process ultimately and get them to that point. Other thing too, we move them where we want to go. Any final takeaways that you have you can think of?
I don't think so. I think that's it.
The reality is, right, you must help them live in a place of emotion. You must help them feel. We must get them to the place of making emotional decisions backed up by logic. For anybody that's in the high-level sales game, this is kind of basic stuff. But what I found is most agents aren't highly trained on this. Now, it's one thing to know it. It's another thing to internalize it, right? And so you've got to make sure you're able to tap into this. And the process we got to do is we got to take them from person to person to person. I'll kind of show you an example. You kind of see I have my note here of taking the example here through Bob, right? I'm taking Bob from A, B, C to D. You've got to move that person through that process of kind of what that is and get them there to that. And so that's what our goal here is to do. Any more information you guys want, we're here to help serve you. If you have any more information, go to sloantraining.com. You can watch all previous episodes there. We're getting those uploaded. Any questions you have, always you can get a free one-on-one coaching consultation. We're here to help serve. Any questions you have, reply back to the email. Let us know your thoughts. You want training on an aspect? We train on everything. We're here to help serve you, and we'll go deeper next week, even more into the whole strategic seduction process.